SpongeBob never set out to tell a horror story, but in between all the happy and funny moments, it delivered some moments that will genuinely disturb you. Starting with the most infamous example of this, the Splinter. It starts off so normal, so happy. SpongeBob is in the Krusty Krab, being his usual hyper-energetic self. He's flipping patties, he's excited for the day, he's just pure, uncut SpongeBob. His energy is so infectious that he accidentally launches his beloved spatula, spat, into the ceiling. No big deal, right? He just stacks a bunch of stuff to climb up and get it. But this is where things start to go horribly wrong. As he's climbing down, he slips on some tartar sauce, the camera goes into this dramatic slow-motion shot, and we see his thumb drag across the wooden floor until it rams right into a piece of wood. It gives him a splinter. Now, a splinter doesn't sound that bad. We've all had them. It's a minor inconvenience, but this is a SpongeBob splinter. Immediately, his thumb turns red and swells up. It looks painful, sure, but it's the show's dedication to making it look as disgusting as possible. SpongeBob tries to pull it out, but he can't. He tries to bite it out and his face skin rips off, revealing his skeleton underneath for a split second. He can't even hold his spatula, so he has to tie it to his nose to keep working. This is where Squidward comes in, and instead of being helpful, he decides to be, well, Squidward. He tells SpongeBob that if Mr. Krabs finds out about his on-the-job injury, he'll be sent home for good. This sends SpongeBob into panic. The idea of being sent home from the Krusty Krab is, for him, a fate worse than death. So he does the only logical thing he can think of. He calls Patrick for medical assistance. Patrick shows up in a fake doctor's outfit, ready to cure his best friend. He starts by inspecting SpongeBob's foot for some reason, even putting it in his mouth. But then he gets to the actual problem, the thumb. And his solution is maybe the worst thing he could have possibly done. He takes a giant wooden stake and a hammer, places the stake right on top of the splinter and just smashes it. He hammers the splinter deeper into SpongeBob's thumb. The result is horrifying. SpongeBob's thumb swells up to a monstrous size. It's huge, dark purple, and throbbing. Patrick looks at this giant pulsating mound of flesh and says, "There appears to be a little bit of swelling." A little bit! He then decides a garbage compress will help. He literally just slaps a pile of wet, disgusting garbage onto the open wound. This, of course, infects it immediately. The area around the splinter starts fizzing with a sickly green ooze, and the thumb turns an even darker, more gruesome shade. It is legit one of the most disgusting things ever animated for a children's show. Patrick, seeing his handiwork, just says his shift is over and leaves. Thanks for nothing, Patrick. Mr. Krabs finally seeing the thumb, and he surprisingly easily pulls the splinter out with his claw. But then, in the most infamous and disturbing moment of the episode, the infected boil on SpongeBob's thumb explodes in a massive eruption of green pus, which Mr. Krabs has to shield himself from with an umbrella. It's a full-on disgusting geyser of infected bodily fluids. Once the pus dissipates and the boil shrinks, SpongeBob's thumb returns to normal. The episode ends with Mr. Krabs relieved he doesn't have to pay workers' compensation. And that is how you do body horror for kids. You make it so cartoonishly vile that it's almost funny, but you also make it so memorable that it haunts a generation. But if you think a swollen thumb is the peak of SpongeBob's body horror, you are sorely mistaken, because it gets so much crazier from here. Let's talk about transformation. Not the emotional kind, but the literal, biological, Cronenberg-esque kind of transformation. Let's talk about I Was a Teenage Gary. This is another one that just sears itself into your brain. The premise is simple enough. SpongeBob and Patrick are going to a jellyfish convention for the weekend, and they need someone to watch Gary. They manage to convince Squidward to do it, mostly because he's thrilled at the idea of them being gone for 3 whole days. SpongeBob gives him extremely simple instructions. Feed Gary in the morning and at night. That's it. But Squidward, in his infinite selfishness, completely forgets. He just sunbathes for 3 days straight, not giving Gary a single thought. When SpongeBob comes back, Squidward has a moment of panic and realizes he never fed the snail. He rushes into SpongeBob's house to find Gary horribly sick and withered from dehydration and starvation. It's genuinely sad to see. He tries to force-feed Gary, but it's too late. To cover his tracks, he shoves all the snail food into his own mouth just as SpongeBob walks in. SpongeBob, seeing his beloved pet so ill, calls a veterinarian. The vet, Dr. Gilliam, determines that Gary needs a shot of snail plasma. Here's the catch. The vet is too squeamish to give the shot himself, so he leaves the syringe with SpongeBob. SpongeBob is also too squeamish, so he begs Squidward to do it. What follows is a chaotic scene where Squidward tries to inject Gary, but SpongeBob is so worried about hurting him, that he keeps moving him around. In the struggle, Squidward accidentally injects the syringe of snail plasma right into SpongeBob's nose. Meanwhile, Gary drinks some water and instantly recovers, making Squidward's negligence even more glaring. SpongeBob is worried, but Squidward, annoyed and wanting to leave, tells him he'll be fine. Nothing will happen. He could not have been more wrong. That night, SpongeBob starts to act strange. He eats all of Gary's food and then lets out an involuntary meow. He tries to brush it off, telling himself it's all in his head. He walks slowly into the bathroom, his footsteps becoming sluggish. And then the transformation begins. The music gets dramatic. His eyes bug out of his head, then stretch out on stalks. He screams as his arms and legs retract into his body. His entire form shortens and becomes snail-like. His last desperate words before he completely loses the ability to speak are, "Something is wrong with me."
I take it back, Gary. Something is wrong with me.
He is now, for all intents and purposes, a snail. The panic in his voice, the way his body contorts against his will, it's the stuff of nightmares. He goes to Squidward's house for help, but a terrified Squidward, now blaming the snail plasma, and not his own terrible aim or neglect, tries to block all his doors and windows from the snail SpongeBob. He screams and runs in a panic, believing he's under attack by a monster. SpongeBob, however, is simply trying to get help, but Squidward's terror prevents him from understanding. In the chaotic chase, Squidward, ironically, accidentally injects himself with the same snail plasma, leading to his own transformation into a snail. The episode ends with Gary, SpongeBob, and Squidward, all now snails, sitting on a fence and meowing a song, much to Patrick's annoyance. He throws a boot at Squidward's snail, knocking him off the fence, but they continue their snail-like singing. The permanent transformation, the loss of self, the reduction to a primal, animal state.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow.
Meow, 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 meow.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow.
It's a terrifying concept wrapped in the goofy package of a Saturday morning cartoon. Okay, so we've had a splinter infection and a snail transformation. How could it possibly get more disturbing? I'll tell you how. A full-blown zombie apocalypse. I'm talking about the episode Krabby Patty Creature Feature. The story starts with customers at the Krusty Krab being bored with the regular menu. They want something new. So, Mr. Krabs reveals he's had Sandy working in a secret underground lab to create a new, scientifically engineered Krabby Patty. Right off the bat, SpongeBob doesn't like it, saying the original Krabby Patty is perfect perfection that cannot be perfected upon. He's not wrong, but Mr. Krabs is blinded by dollar signs, as usual. They start serving these glowing orange patties, and everyone eats them up, but then, as the day ends, Mr. Krabs decides to try one for himself. And that's when it all goes wrong. He starts to feel sick. SpongeBob points out that there are sesame seeds growing out of his back. Then Mr. Krabs mutates. His head turns into a bun, his body becomes a patty, and his claws stick out of the top. He becomes a grotesque, moaning Krabby Patty monster. Then Sandy transforms. Then Squidward. then all the customers. The entire Krusty Krab is filled with these patty zombies. But it doesn't stop there. The creatures break out of the restaurant and start swarming Bikini Bottom. And their method of spreading the infection is what makes this so messed up. They don't just bite people, they grab pieces of their own patty flesh bodies and force feed them to their victims. It's a zombie plague based on forced cannibalism. It is absolutely insane for a kid's show. We see Patrick become one. We see Bubble Bass become a giant one. The whole town falls. Spongebob is one of the last survivors, hiding in a dumpster. He learns from a news report by Perch Perkins, right before Perch himself is turned, that Plankton is the only other uninfected person.
Who's the third person not affected?
SpongeBob escapes to the chum bucket, barricading the doors. He tries to explain the situation to Plankton, who doesn't believe him until the horde of patty zombies breaks down the door. They even infect Karen, turning her computer monitor into a Krabby Patty screen that just says, "Consume me." It's so creepy. Plankton gets turned, and SpongeBob is the last one left. He climbs a tower of chum bags to escape. And this is where he discovers the cure by accident. A bag of chum rips open and some of it falls into the zombified Patrick's mouth. The chum makes him sick and he throws up the secret patty that infected him, turning him back to normal. So, the cure for this zombie plague is literally the worst food in the ocean. SpongeBob has to feed chum to the entire town of zombies to save them, but leaving them sick to their stomachs. The episode ends with everyone wanting the original Krabby Patty, realizing its perfection. But then there's one final chilling sting. The screen is about to fade to black, and the Krabby Patty zombified Patrick stops it, pulls off one of his eyes, and, with a laugh, offers it to the viewer. Have some! But hey, it's not always about zombies and monsters. Sometimes the most disturbing moments are the ones that are terrifyingly human.
And 3, 2.
Let's talk about the time SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs thought they committed a murder in Nasty Patty. The premise alone is just wild. A health inspector shows up at the Krusty Krab. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are panicking, trying to make sure everything is perfect. But then a news report comes on about a fake health inspector who's just scamming restaurants for free food. Mr. Krabs, being the money-obsessed crab that he is, immediately jumps to the conclusion that their inspector is the fake one. He is enraged at the idea of giving away free food. So he decides they're going to teach this imposter a lesson. They decide to make him the most disgusting, vile, poisonous patty imaginable. They use volcano sauce, seahorse radish, and Mr. Krabs even adds toenail clippings from his office. As if that wasn't enough, SpongeBob accidentally drops the patty in the toilet. Mr. Krabs tells him to just fish it out, and then he dries it off with his sweaty, filthy gym socks. The final product, the Nasty Patty, is a festering, green, pimpled monstrosity. They serve it to the health inspector. But before he can take a bite, a fly flies into his mouth, he starts choking, and then he slips, hits his head on a table, and gets knocked unconscious. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, watching from the kitchen, think he ate the patty and are laughing their heads off at his suffering. But then another news report comes on. The real imposter has been caught, and it's a completely different fish. They realize their health inspector was real, and looking at his unconscious body on the floor, they come to the only logical conclusion. Their Nasty Patty has killed him. The rest of the episode, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, in a full-blown panic, try to dispose of the body. They drag him out to a hill and bury him. A couple of cops show up, but it turns out they just want to ride back to the Krusty Krab. It starts to rain, and the mud washes away, causing the body to slide down the hill right behind the police car. They have to stuff the body in the trunk. The whole situation is just so unbelievably morbid. They're trying to hide a dead body from the police. Back at the Krusty Krab, they try to hide him in the freezer, but the cops get suspicious. The tension just keeps building until Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob break down and confess to the murder. They scream that they killed him and hid the body in the freezer. Of course, when the cops open the freezer, it's empty because the inspector had woken up and walked out. But for the bulk of the episode, our two main heroes are convinced they are murderers, and they are doing everything they can to cover up the crime. It's so dark and so funny in the most unsettling way possible.
Okay, I confess! SpongeBob killed him!
What? You can't pin this whole rap on me!
He was insane, out of control! He would have killed me too if you hadn't come
It
along!
was all Mr. Krabs' idea.
But paranoia isn't the only psychological disturbance in Bikini Bottom. Let's talk about addiction in the episode Just One Bite. This one reportedly got banned in South Korea for its scary themes, and you'll soon see why. Squidward, in his typical fashion, expresses his utter disgust for Krabby Patties, despite never having tried one. SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, insists he tries it, claiming they're so good, the only people who dislike Krabby Patties have never eaten one. To get SpongeBob to leave him alone, Squidward takes a single, reluctant bite. He immediately declares it the worst food he's ever eaten, and buries the patty to its death. But the second SpongeBob leaves, Squidward, in a moment of weakness, desperately digs up the buried patty and devours it. His eyes light up. He loves them. He's hooked. This immediate, almost drug-like addiction is the first unsettling hint of what's to come. But now he's in a pickle. He told SpongeBob he hated them, and he can't let his rival know his secret shame. So begins Squidward's desperate, stealthy quest for more Krabby Patties. He tries to order one for a customer who isn't there, but SpongeBob eats it himself. Then he resorts to digging a half-eaten patty out of the trash, only for SpongeBob to find it and sadly burn it, leaving Squidward sobbing. The real disturbance kicks in when Squidward, having a dream about a giant Krabby Patty as his wife, yes, you heard that right, becomes utterly determined. He sneaks back to the Krusty Krab in the middle of the night, tiptoeing past SpongeBob's house. In a scene that was reportedly cut from most copies of the episode, Squidward is flamed by 2 buckets of gas as booby traps and security. This is straight up Home Alone levels of sadistic security, but with actual flammable gas. He then enters the Patty Vault, a literal treasury of Krabby Patties. But before he can indulge, SpongeBob appears, revealing he comes to work at 3 a.m. to count sesame seeds. SpongeBob quickly figures out Squidward's secret. When confronted, Squidward finally breaks, admitting his love for Krabby Patties, and then, in a frenzied, animalistic display, wolfs down every single patty in the vault. SpongeBob, initially amused, then becomes genuinely concerned, warning him, "You shouldn't eat all those at once." Squidward, bloated and arrogant, sarcastically predicts he'll explode. And then he does. Not a cartoon puff of smoke, but a genuinely graphic explosion. The eaten Krabby Patties go down to his thighs, and then he literally explodes into pieces. The final image is of a beheaded Squidward being taken to the hospital in an ambulance, with a paramedic holding his detached tentacles, reminiscing about his first Krabby Patty.
Yeah, I remember my first Krabby Patty.
It's a darkly comedic end to a story about how a simple craving can spiral into a destructive, all-consuming obsession. But SpongeBob could also be disturbing on a much deeper, more emotional level. Which brings me to Have You Seen This Snail? Also known as Where's Gary? This episode is a feature-length special, and it uses that extra time to just absolutely wreck you emotionally. It starts with SpongeBob getting a new Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy paddleball set. It comes with a Dirty Bubble Challenge, which requires him to hit the ball an absurd number of times in a row. SpongeBob becomes completely obsessed, to the point where he totally neglects Gary. Gary tries to get his attention, to tell him he's hungry, but SpongeBob just gets angry and yells at him to leave him alone. For a pet owner, this is hard to watch. We see Gary, heartbroken and starving, pack a little bag and run away from home. The show really takes its time showing his lonely journey, making you feel his sadness and desperation. SpongeBob is so absorbed in his game that he doesn't even realize Gary is gone for like a week. When he finally does, he launches a massive town-wide search, putting up posters and flyers everywhere. Meanwhile, Gary is lost in a new, scary city. He's hungry and alone. And then he's found by a sweet-looking old lady. For a moment, it seems like he's safe. She takes him in, calls him Miss Tuftsy, and just pampers him. She gives him mountains of cookies and food. She seems like the perfect, loving owner. But something is off. The episode builds this incredible sense of creeping dread. Gary is happy at first, but then he starts to notice things. He finds a closet, and when he opens it, it's filled with dozens and dozens of empty, cracked snail shells. It's a snail graveyard. He looks at the old woman who is constantly trying to fatten him up, and he realizes the horrifying truth. She's not saving snails, she's fattening them up to eat them. She's a predator. The snails in a painting on her wall even come to life for a second to warn him, whispering, "Run!" It is a terrifying reveal, straight out of a fairy tale horror story like Hansel and Gretel. Gary makes a desperate escape with the sweet old grandma chasing him, still trying to feed him cookies, which now look menacing. Gary manages to escape, pushing another snail in front of the old lady, so she takes him instead. He makes his way back to Bikini Bottom, still desperate to find SpongeBob. Back home, SpongeBob is giving up, sobbing on his couch, admitting he took Gary for granted. In a truly emotional moment, Gary finds him, and they have a tearful reunion. SpongeBob promises to do better, to feed him, to never neglect him again. But Gary, still traumatized and overfed, simply groans, "Meow," indicating he's had enough food for a lifetime. It's a happy ending, but the journey to get there is one of the most emotionally raw and disturbing stories the show ever told. Even in its more recent seasons, SpongeBob has proven that it can still tap into that vein of bizarre, unsettling, and just plain weird storytelling. A prime example of this is the season 12 episode, SpongeBob's Bad Habit. This one is just deeply uncomfortable from start to finish. It starts off innocently enough. Squidward's complaining as usual about his terrible job at the Krusty Krab. Nobody's listening, of course, except SpongeBob, who's all smiles and ready to lend an ear. But then he preps a customer's order, and what does he do? He starts biting his nails. And not just a little nibble, but fingernail clippings flying into people's food and drinks. Imagine taking a big gulp of soda only to spit out someone else's chewed up nail. Gross, right? The other customers are absolutely disgusted, and honestly, so are we. Squidward, who's already at his breaking point, points it out. SpongeBob denies it, even as he's actively gnawing on his nails. It's like he has no control, a truly bad habit. He tries to stop. Oh, he tries. He sits on his hands, but then more hands pop out of his body, driven by this uncontrollable urge. He even tries to paint his nails to make them too pretty to bite, but then he just imagines them as Krabby Patties and chows down. It's a truly disturbing visualization of addiction, even if it's played for laughs. But it gets so much crazier from here. He goes for a walk, ties his hands in knots, and what happens? His feet pop out of his shoes and he starts biting his toenails. It's beyond disgusting. Then he bumps into poor Fred, whose nails he compliments before biting them right off Fred's hands. SpongeBob then finds Mrs. Puff at a nail salon and, you guessed it, bites her nails too. He's completely unhinged. Patrick tries to help by taking him to Glove World, but SpongeBob just attacks a glove balloon, biting its nails until it pops. They get kicked out, of course. Finally, they call Sandy. She tries a helmet, but SpongeBob finds a way to bite his nails from inside his own mouth. Then she uses a pillory, a device that locks his hands and feet, but he still manages to escape, and in a truly shocking moment, Sandy wakes up to find SpongeBob biting her nails. The final act of this bizarre story is when they take SpongeBob to a hypnotherapist. The therapist discovers that SpongeBob isn't just biting his nails. He thinks he's Squidward and has subconsciously picked up Squidward's nail-biting habit because he hates his job. SpongeBob is so deeply empathetic, or perhaps just so easily influenced, that he's absorbed Squidward's misery to the point of a physical manifestation. The therapist snaps his fingers, and SpongeBob is supposedly cured. He's back to normal, but then we find out the therapist is Hans, the sentient hand from other episodes. And the hypnosis? It backfired. SpongeBob, still affected, starts biting Hans' nails. And just as Squidward walks in for his own appointment, he sees this grotesque scene and starts nervously biting his own nails, clearly terrified. The episode ends with Squidward needing therapy for his therapy.
Hans, I'm here for my weekly appointment.
It's a strange, cyclical, and deeply weird exploration of anxiety and compulsive behavior. Now let's talk about a different kind of horror. The horror of being completely helpless and misunderstood. The horror of losing your identity. Let's talk about The Thing. It all starts with Squidward trying to enjoy a quiet evening alone. But SpongeBob and Patrick, in their usual oblivious way, crash his party. Fed up, Squidward leaves his house, declaring he'll go somewhere far away from them. But karma, or perhaps just bad luck, strikes. He's hit by a truck full of cement. He's launched into jellyfish fields where the cement hardens, turning him into a solid, gray, concrete-covered blob. He's trapped, unable to move or speak clearly, only able to make muffled groans. SpongeBob and Patrick, out jellyfishing, stumble upon him. They have no idea it's Squidward. Instead, they mistake him for a wild animal they affectionately call Smelly. This is the core of the disturbing aspect. Squidward is fully aware, fully present, but utterly trapped within his concrete prison, unable to communicate his identity or his distress. SpongeBob and Patrick, with their well-meaning but utterly misguided intentions, adopt him. They take him back to SpongeBob's pineapple, where Gary immediately attacks Smelly. SpongeBob, still clueless, decides it's too dangerous for Smelly to stay because Gary's never attacked anyone like that except Squidward. Oh, the irony. Patrick decides to take him in, leading to a truly pathetic game of catch, where Patrick throws a ball at the cement-covered Squidward. Smelly gets angry, leading Patrick to call animal control, who take the poor, trapped Squidward to the zoo. At the zoo, it gets even more heartbreaking. People gather around Smelly's cage, laughing and calling him hideous. Squidward is a spectacle, a lonely, misunderstood creature. SpongeBob, feeling bad for the ugly animal, decides to break him out. He and Patrick, dressed in black ski masks, infiltrate the zoo in a rescue mission. They manage to free Smelly, but are caught by the police. They escape through a manhole, ending up in the sewers. The truly bizarre and disturbing twist comes next. They emerge into a jungle-like landscape filled with creatures that look exactly like Smelly. SpongeBob and Patrick, believing they've found Smelly's real family, decide to leave him there. Squidward, still trapped, can only watch as his clueless friends abandon him with a species he doesn't belong to. The creatures accept him, and as Kelpie G, the smooth jazz musician Squidward loves, plays his clarinet, the cement finally cracks open. Squidward, now free, can only nervously utter, hi. The episode ends there, leaving Squidward stranded, far from home, with a tribe of creatures who think he's one of them.
Hi.
It's a story about the terror of being trapped, not just in a shell of cement, but in a role you didn't choose, unable to make anyone see you for who you really are. But you know, sometimes, the most disturbing things are social. The fear of being outcast, of having everyone turn on you, of your friends laughing at you instead of with you. And that brings us to the surprisingly dark episode, Squirrel Jokes. The Krusty Krab starts a comedy night and SpongeBob gets his shot. His initial jokes are, well, terrible. He tries to make jokes about salt shakers and tomatoes and the crowd just sits there. Even Patrick is booing him. Desperate for a laugh, SpongeBob spots Sandy's buck teeth. and in a moment of panic, makes a joke about them, and guess what? The crowd laughs. They actually laugh. This is where things take a dark turn. SpongeBob, now addicted to the applause, starts telling them more and more squirrel jokes. He makes fun of their fur, how they smell, how stupid they supposedly are, all based on harmful stereotypes. The crowd eats it up, but Sandy, his best friend, sits there, clearly hurt. After his set, Sandy confronts him. She tells him his jokes are hurtful, but SpongeBob, in his innocent, oblivious way, insists it's just an act. He assures her, "Everyone knows you're the smartest creature in Bikini Bottom." But the next day, it's clear they don't. Everyone in Bikini Bottom starts avoiding or ridiculing Sandy, treating her exactly how SpongeBob's jokes portrayed squirrels, as smelly, stupid yokels. Imagine your best friend, someone you trust, unknowingly poisoning everyone's perception of you for a laugh. As subtle as it is, this betrayal makes me very uncomfortable. Sandy tries again to get him to stop, explaining how it's affecting her. SpongeBob tries his old bad jokes, but the crowd demands squirrel jokes. In a truly frustrating moment, SpongeBob succumbs to the pressure. He comes back out with fake buck teeth and a stereotypical southern accent, leaning even harder into the offensive caricatures. The crowd goes wild and Sandy is utterly crushed. But the most disturbing part is yet to come. SpongeBob gets a note from Sandy, seemingly forgiving him and inviting him to celebrate at her tree dome. He goes thinking everything is fine, only to find Sandy acting exactly like the idiotic, clueless yokel his jokes made her out to be. She literally glues him to his seat so he won't fall off, takes his water helmet for a vase, and when he starts to dehydrate, she stuffs a hose in his mouth, filling him with water until he expands to fill the entire tree dome. All the while, she's repeating phrases like, "A squirrel sure is stupid," with a vacant look in her eyes. It's a horrific visual, but more than that, it's Sandy's complete mental and emotional breakdown, a direct consequence of SpongeBob's actions. She has internalized the prejudice so deeply that she's become the caricature. Only when he's literally bursting does SpongeBob finally promise to stop the squirrel jokes. The episode ends with him making fun of everyone else, including himself. And while it's meant to show he learned his lesson, the image of a broken, self-deprecating Sandy is hard to shake.
Howdy, y'all! How come it takes more than one squirrel to screw in a light bulb?
Finally, let's talk about Shell Shocked, an episode that makes you cringe and then just feel awful. It's about Gary losing his shell and SpongeBob's increasingly destructive attempts to replace it. The episode begins with SpongeBob having a nightmare. He wakes up to crashing sounds in his kitchen. Convinced there's an intruder, he arms himself with a tennis racket and helmet, only to find his novelty teeth chattering and a fancy boot hopping around. He attacks the boot, unaware that Gary is hiding inside it. Gary crashes out, and a bucket of soap falls on him. When SpongeBob removes the bucket, Gary has soap in his mouth, and most importantly, when SpongeBob pats his shell in relief, it breaks into pieces. Gary, now shellless, starts crying in pain, a truly heartbreaking sound. He refuses SpongeBob's hugs and crawls up the wall in agony. SpongeBob, feeling terrible, tries to fix it with Band-Aids, but it just falls apart. Then begins the agonizing search for a new shell. SpongeBob tries various things from his trunk, a Hawaiian shirt, a Santa hat, his own pants, which get soggy and fall off, a space helmet, all to no avail. Gary, understandably, is not amused. Gary shows SpongeBob a Shell Spiffy magazine, pointing to a new shell identical to his old one, for the outrageous price of $9,595.95. SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, can't afford that. So Gary points him to a commercial for Angry Jack's Shell Emporium, where prices are supposedly slashed like crazy. Angry Jack, a seemingly enraged salesman, advertises cheap, refurbished shells, declaring his anger over his massive inventory. When SpongeBob and Gary arrive, they interrupt Angry Jack's commercial. He reveals his anger is just for show to make his commercials louder and better. He finds a shell identical to Gary's old one, and Gary is overjoyed. But when SpongeBob goes to put it on Gary, it slips off and immediately breaks. Gary is devastated again. Then things get really bad. Angry Jack tries another shell, but SpongeBob, wanting to make sure it's battened down, pushes on it so hard that it cracks and breaks. Then he accidentally smashes another shell over Angry Jack's face. He trips over his shoelaces and breaks yet another. Realizing SpongeBob is a one-snail wrecking crew, Jack tells him to just hold Gary while he handles the shells. He puts a reflective shell on Gary, which blinds both SpongeBob and Gary. Stumbling around blindly, SpongeBob then proceeds to accidentally destroy every single shell in the store, at least 3,000 of them. Angry Jack, now genuinely furious, demands payment. SpongeBob gives him his life savings, a handful of change, but Jack wants more. He demands SpongeBob's arms, legs, internal organs, an eyeball, and his pants. SpongeBob surprisingly complies, reducing himself to a limbless, one-eyed torso in his desperation. He then tries to make Gary a shell out of a cardboard box, drawing a shell pattern on it. But Gary, utterly depressed, just meows sadly, and both of them break down crying. Mr. Krabs, who literally emerges from a dumpster, offers to help for a price. SpongeBob, still shellless himself, agrees to work for free for the rest of the year and even lets Mr. Krabs cut his health insurance. The episode ends with SpongeBob still having nightmares. He wakes up to find Gary wearing Mr. Krabs' shell, and Mr. Krabs, shivering from the cold, asking for a blanket. SpongeBob makes a joke about Gary's new shell. Annoyed, Gary then locks SpongeBob out of his house and turns off the lights.
There you go, Mr. Krabs.
Thanks, boyo. Now I'm all toasty.
Ah, I guess all shell that ends shell, huh, Gary? Ah, Gary.
The episode as a whole is a crazy, hopeless journey full of pain, destruction, and a level of body horror by proxy that is truly amazing. If you enjoyed this video and want to see me break down the SpongeBob episode about murder, click the video on the screen.